Oh, it's recording. Great. Thank
All
you.
right.
Hi. You know, technology, always fun. Um, Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for the 10 minutes of calm while we tried to slow down a little bit, drink some tea, get a little bit more peaceful in our day. My name is Sarah Feingold. I'm a co-founder of The Fourth Floor. The Fourth Floor helps female founders rise up by putting amazing executives on their boards, and helps executives rise up by getting them board seats so that they can help founders rise up and leverage a smaller board opportunity into a larger board opportunity. It's my pleasure that today we're going to be talking about going slow with Tiffany Hopkins. And I'm going to let Tiffany introduce herself. But we are recording this, so if anybody is uncomfortable with that, then you can turn off your video or turn off your audio. And then I'll turn the floor over to Tiffany to give a little introduction and talk about going slow. It's on you, Tiffany. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. And so how hard was that for everybody to sit and do nothing for 10 minutes? Or did anybody actually do nothing for 10 minutes? It's really hard. And, you know, for me, I do that a lot. I'm a marketing consultant, and I used to work in actually at Broom with Sarah a couple years ago. And before that, with a bunch of other e-commerce companies. I'm very naturally a person who wants to do about 10,000 things per day minimum. And it has been a real journey for me to get to a place of calm, of slowing down enough to really appreciate life and find, for me, some, well, good health has been an important thing, financial independence, and, you know, in a lot of ways, freedom from, you know, doing anything that I don't necessarily want to do. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that. But you're all probably here today because you didn't make a choice to suddenly go slow. I very deliberately made a choice about 8 years ago to quit my full-time job, and for whatever reason, starting up my own company happened very slowly for me. So I had a lot of time to adjust and figure out what I should be doing day by day. So I'm going to share my experience. A few things I want to say before I do that is yours may be very different or very similar, or most likely somewhere kind of in between. But I thought sharing a little bit about how I adjusted over the course of 8 years might help those of you who are adjusting rapidly over the course of days or hours to a lot less external input, a lot less external structure, and a lot more time where you have to figure out what to do and when. And you know, what we spend our time doing is a really difficult choice. So the other thing is, I'm not a doctor or therapist or financial advisor. I want to just say that before I get started. Those are all important things that will come up in our discussion, I think. And I'm just going to share kind of how things work for me. So I think we'll have time at the end too for you to ask questions. You can put them in the chat too as you go if you'd like. So like I said, I kind of chose to give up the fast life, and I also went back and forth to it a few times, sort of intentionally. But I basically found myself waking up after quitting my job on Monday mornings being like, wow, I have no idea what to do with myself right now. Like, I don't have anywhere I have to go. I don't have any work I have to do. Like, I'm not prepared for this whatsoever, and I need to figure out A, how to support myself, and B, how to not lose my mind without anybody telling me what it is I should be doing every day. And there were so many emotional and like financial roller coasters that kind of went through there. But before we talk about kind of what's hard about it, I wanted to tell you all why I made those choices to slow down and to not have a sort of regular life, and what that's meant in terms of, how basically since, in the last month, my day-to-day life has not changed at all. I'm doing the same things when I get up every morning. I'm having the same Zoom calls I already did. I'm cooking all my meals like I already did. Like, nothing has changed. And I recognize for most people that's not the case over the last few weeks. So what I'm going to talk about has a profound effect on my life, and has somehow, over my choices over years, has led me to the same place many of you and the world are, for some strange reason, very quickly. So I basically wanted financial freedom, financial independence, and financial stability. And I wanted that in a way that wasn't affected by who I worked for, what I did every day. I wanted to be able to be sure that I could support myself without having a boss I didn't like, without contributing to economies I didn't appreciate or industries I didn't like. I had done work in e-commerce, I'd worked for media companies, I'd done a bunch of stuff that it wasn't like I didn't feel good about it, but I had lots of bosses I didn't like. I did a lot of things that were not fun. I wanted to be able to say I was proud of what I was doing, and the way I made the choice to do that was by working for myself. So that was one of the big reasons I did this, is it gave me the freedom to make my own choices in terms of how I spend my time. So that was a big foundational decision. But what it also did is freed me up to make choices where I prioritize my health before my job. I've had a lot of health issues over the last few years that I wouldn't be able to have weathered, I don't think, if I didn't have choices for how I spend every day. And when I don't feel well, I don't work that day. Like, I remember when I had an office job, or even when I was consulting for other companies, if I didn't feel well, I was going to take whatever I could to, I get really bad menstrual cycles, and so I would be taking 1,200 milligrams of ibuprofen for 3 days a month so I could get into the office and just do the work. And it progressively got worse and worse and worse and worse. And now I can make that choice to stay home and not work that day or 2 days or 3 days, in a way that wasn't an option. And I think that's something a lot of people might be experiencing a bit now, is there's a little bit of relaxed pressure that maybe we can, okay, I can't work on Friday, but I'll work on Saturday instead. Or, that's something that's very hard to do when everybody's going to the same place every day, and it's very obvious. You didn't show up a bunch of days in a row. What's going on? Like that, all that kind of external pressure, you don't necessarily realize how much that affects making decisions on what you're going to do that day. But if you can, if you're working from home already, it gives you a little bit more leeway to say, hey, I don't really feel like this. I really don't feel that well today. Maybe I'll take the day off, or just the morning. It doesn't have to be a whole day. And I found that's another thing, kind of going hour by hour through my day. Maybe I just get up an hour later and work an hour later, or just don't work one of those hours today. And like, that's okay. One of the other big shifts is that as soon as I stopped having a regular paycheck, I realized there's a lot of things I can't spend money on. And there was a huge restructuring in my financial life and how I make decisions on what I spend money on. Part of it was just having less money and being realistic about what I could actually do. And a lot of it was, hey, I realized that if I'm not paying $2,000 a month in rent, I could work $2,000 less in a month. And I actually started making these choices that I'm going to make less money and not pay rent and live somewhere cheaper. So I live in basically the middle of nowhere right now. And I have a lovely house, and I work, as far as how much work goes towards my living expenses, it's a very, very small percentage. And instead of making up that money and using it for something else, I just don't make that money. And that was like a completely mind-blowing, life-changing decision. It used to be before, make as much as I can, and if I have extra, I save it, and that's great, or I go on an extra trip or I buy a thing. And now I just make less money and I spend less money. And if I decide, like, I'm remodeling my house, I need to make some extra money, then okay, I'll go, for example, go get another full-time job for a while, or get a big client that forces me to work 40 hours a week or whatever it is. But it's making a choice and doing it intentionally for that thing, instead of this. It was like always trying to make as much money as I possibly could. And I don't think I'm saying it that way, and it sounds horrible. Possibly it does to me still, but that was realistically, that was how I lived. And it was fun. I loved making lots of money. It was addicting. It's a super fun thing to do, and it wasn't that hard for me. Like, I enjoyed it, and it just felt like winning. And so one of the crazy things is when I stopped doing that, it felt like I wasn't winning anymore. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, the only days I felt like I was winning again were the days I made money. And I was like, I've made a choice to make less money, but I still only feel good when I make money, or I feel really good when I make money, and I don't feel as good the other days. And it's taken me a really long time to, I don't know, reframe or just get used to the fact that there are other ways to be successful, and my days are still worthwhile if I'm not making money. And a big part of that is being careful about how I spend and not spending money, because it really feels bad to spend money you don't have. And that's another thing that took me a long time to recognize, because I have great credit. I can buy whatever I want. And that's supposed to be empowering, but it's like actually kind of scary. And debt, when you pay off debt, you realize how much of a weight that debt is on you. Like, I had a lot of school debt, and it wasn't until I paid it off till I was like, wow, I have a whole different level of freedom right now, than I did. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Like, I go on austerity months where I don't spend money on anything other than food and gas and my living expenses. And it feels so good. And it's like, yes, it feels really good to like buy new clothes, or I don't know, get your nails done or do whatever. But those months when I make it through a whole month without buying anything, I say I can buy up to 3 books under $5 each in my austerity months. But it's amazing. You make it through a month and you're like, wow, I just saved a lot of money. And I basically just made myself a whole bunch of more time, because I can work that much less for not spending that. I feel like I've been just like talking a lot. It's so weird not to have people asking questions.
Do you want me to? So I have a lot of questions for you, Tiffany. Can I ask some of them?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So you kind of talked about your story and how you went from New York City to the middle of nowhere that I very much want to visit you sometime. Can you talk a little bit about like pulling off the Band-Aid? Because I mean, I knew you at Vroom when you're the marketing director, coming into the work, same, like a lot of pressure, a lot of things going on. And then one day you're like, oh, by the way, I'm leaving. And I didn't know that this was an 8-year process. I've only known you for the past couple of years. So could you talk about the New York ripping off the Band-Aid and moving over and what happened?
Yeah. And for me, it was literally ripping off a Band-Aid. I had started making tax payments on the house I live in now for my cousin, because she couldn't pay for it anymore. And it took me a solid 4 months, I think, before I realized I could actually live in the house I was paying taxes on. And so like, I was like, ding, ding, ding. And then literally the next day I like quit my job, I broke up with my boyfriend at the time, which is not really relevant, but kind of always relevant. And then told my roommates I was moving out. So it was like ripping off a Band-Aid, because as soon as the idea came to me, which was my sister's idea, she told me, why don't you move to that cottage? And I was like, I just knew immediately, like, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And the kind of just who I am, I didn't think about any of the other stuff. So I realized that lots of people are going to do the opposite. They're going to think about all the logistics and how hard it's going to be. And I was like, nope, I don't have to go to work anymore. I don't have to deal with walking my dogs in the city. Like, I'm not going to have to do any of this. I'm not going to have to pay all this rent. I was just like ready to go. And so for me, it was super easy, all of that part. And then I showed up here and there's 7 feet of snow and there was no electricity or water or sink or toilet. And it was just a house full of trash and no insulation. And I was like, oh, whoops. Like, what is wrong with me? Right. So I got the Band-Aid pulled off when I had actually like got here. So those moments were probably a little bit more like reality for would be.
That wasn't going slow at all.
No, right. I'm
So
not
7 feet of
naturally
snow is not going slow.
No. And the decision wasn't slow. Like, all of the stuff, I did not move slowly. It is not my natural mindset, which is probably why it's been so fascinating and difficult for me. And I never realized it would be. I was like, it's going to be great. I'm doing what I dream of. It's going to be so easy. And like, never easy, even though it's everything I want, which is also confusing. And I don't know if that makes you feel any better, because none of us, as a society are in this situation because we want to be. So, maybe the grass is always greener, but I can tell you it's not.
And so like, do you have any, so I know that what started us on this conversation is that you made the choice to go slow, and that all of us on the phone probably did not make the choice to go slow. It was sort of handed to us, and my life has dramatically changed in the past couple weeks. I'm accidentally living in upstate New York because I went to visit my parents and now I can't go home. So, there's like a lot of changes that have happened in my life and in a lot of people's lives. With the fourth floor, we used to do events in person. Now we're doing events online. Do you have any like suggestions or hacks from like your lessons of going from the busy life to the more slow life? Suggestions?
Yeah. This is the I think main point of us talking is I figured out a bunch of ways to manage this. So first of all, for me, making money and moving quickly and all of like city life and all that stuff is totally an addiction. Like, you see the dollars in your bank account and you get an adrenaline rush and you're excited. You do 20 things in a day and you're like, yes, I did this stuff. Like, I had to find something to replace those feelings with. Otherwise, it just felt like nothing. Like, it felt very bad. There are many negative emotions in there. So I built over the series of many years, and I'm still building a structure for my own life to, substitute those feelings with something else that was better aligned with my own values. So yes, it might be very easy to feel good when I get that big paycheck, but I also feel really good when I have run with the dogs 2 miles every morning for 6 months straight. Like, that to me is like, I feel really good about that. And it's not every day it feels a little good. Like, that's a true story. I actually have, and other than times when I've been sick, I've done that for almost 5 years. And what feels really good about it is every day I do it, and after I'm done, you get a runner's high. And I'm using the running as an example. Everybody will have different things, but my dogs are happy because they get to run. I feel better physically, and not only does it feel good each day after I do it, but it feels really good to have done it over and over and over and over and over. And the way I get to that point is there's no option. It's basically like if you work in an office, there's not really an option. You go to work every day. So I find things that I do every day, just like that that are not going to an office that are, like I said, aligned with what I really want to spend my time doing, which is exercising and being outside in nature and being with my dogs. So what comes out of that? Running every morning. It also gives me, specifically running gives me a transition from house to work, which is a really hard thing. If I didn't run every day, like the days when I'm not feeling well, I don't run every day. I don't get dressed. I forget to brush my teeth. I basically transition from bed to it's like 1 p.m. and I haven't eaten anything and I'm still in my pajamas. And I might have been working for 4 hours, but I'm like, this is not really a healthy option. Like 5 days in, you're like, whoa. And then like 3 months in, you're like, all right, I got to find some structure. And so for me, I wake up every morning, I drink a glass of water, and that is part of the ritual. Like I do the same things every single morning. So drink a glass of water because you got to be hydrated before you go running. I get my running clothes on, which are next to the bed, so it's not too cold to walk all the way to the other side of the room. And then I go and get the dogs. We run, then I take a shower, then I make breakfast and coffee, and then I go to work, which is on the other side of the room. But it means I've gotten dressed, I've taken a shower, and I've made sure I've eaten something. And it just gives me this really arbitrary structure, but it's what I want. Like, it might not be what I want to do every morning when I wake up. Like most mornings I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that, but I know I'm gonna do it and I'll feel better because I did. And I literally do it every day. There's no days off. It doesn't matter if it's snowing or sleeting. If I can get out of bed, I'm doing that. And I mean, that kind of thing really makes it possible, I think, to live this way.
Yeah, and so your morning routine sounds really important to you. Do you have any other routines? When we were talking before, you said the more you do, the more you do. And
Yeah.
I'd love for you to like talk more about your structure and maybe elaborate on that thought.
Yeah, I say that all the time, and it makes me kind of laugh every time because it's so obvious. And a lot of the things I'm probably talking about are really obvious, but it's I make smoothies for breakfast every morning because if I have to make a breakfast, it takes too much time. And then I get lost in it. And same with lunch. I always have leftovers from dinner for lunch. Otherwise, I get lost in the kitchen for hours. Those little kind of touch points between work and life, sort of making sure they have a beginning and an end so that I'm not doing either too long. I'll get stuck cooking for 4 hours at lunch, and then all of a sudden I have to work till 10 p.m. or I'm working till 10 p.m. and then I didn't eat dinner till 11, and then I can't get up at 7 or 9 or whatever time it is I get up. It's usually 9, which is also a big thing to get really used to. Is very hard because it doesn't feel socially acceptable. So it's sort of the importance of kind of that rigid structure. I kind of can't underestimate, but something feels really good about living within it, like repeating that repetition of doing it every single day. I have a nighttime routine too, and I stretch every evening and most mornings as well, and then getting to bed by a certain time. And then I'll tell you that in between, it's a free-for-all. Like I don't have much of structure when I'm working. It's kind of like here, there, everywhere. I try to find places where there isn't that rigidity, so that because I'm like I said, not naturally a super controlled or like plotting like regular person. So I kind of put in the scaffolding, and then it's all kind of chaos in between. If that makes sense.
Do you have like meal plans or like or shopping plans or something? Like, do you plan out an entire month? How does that work?
That's a great question, because I recently made a huge evolution in my cooking because I started meal planning. Never did it before, and it was always, like I said, a free-for-all. And that there's so much mental work that goes into preparing a meal that we don't often think about is we need to know what we have in the kitchen and what we can make with those things, what we need to get from the store, like making up that delta. We also obviously have to clean and figure out, where in our day that happens. So I did the Epicurious, how to 90 cook 90. It's like, I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it's a meal planning for a month. And I did that. And I really recommend, if anybody has any interest in that kind of thing, like, it just changed my whole world, because I had a shopping list, not a list maker. I had never done a shopping list, but I had a list of all the things to buy. And I took it to the store and I got all the things. And then I had a plan for every night of what to make. So I didn't have to do the thing. My boyfriend was like, what do you feel like? Oh, I don't want to cook that. Like, oh, I don't want to eat that. Like, I don't have any ideas. Okay, I'll have another burrito because we eat that 5 nights a week. So, there was like variation. And it was, again, it's kind of the same idea. There's some structure. Like, I moved meals around and I changed stuff, but it was totally revolutionary. And if, I talked to a lot of people about it, and a lot of people are like, oh, that sounds awful. And actually my boyfriend's like, if you take all the fun out of cooking by meal planning. And for me, it gives the structure to be fun, because now I'm not doing all that prior work, like, to figure out what to cook, because it's there. And then I can actually enjoy the cooking, because I wasn't thinking about it since lunchtime of what I'm going to make in the evening and when I'm going to go to the store. And, and now we're not really going to the store. So it's when I'm going to go to the basement and get whatever I have down there. And they just did a new version of Cook 90. Epicurious did for quarantine, or these times, that is much more flexible. And it's pretty cool. It's like meal 1, sausage in a sheet pan, and it says all the different things that you can replace sausage, or the different vegetables and that kind of thing. So it's very flexible. And so if you're looking for that, I would check out Epicurious. And I can't remember what they call the new one, but I think it's right on the front of their homepage right now.
That's so helpful. Thank you. Because even though you're going slow, it still sounds like you're really trying to figure out the structure of your day and your food and your stretching, your health. How has your spirituality been throughout all of this?
So I'd say it's hard to know which one came first. That is a huge part of how I've survived and thrived. In this, I didn't grow up religious. I didn't have any sort of spiritual practice at all in my life. And I don't know whether it's because all this happened and I was like, I needed a place to turn that wasn't external anymore. Or some little things that happened in the years before, and maybe that kind of opened me up to it. But I've started, at this point, I have a really extreme spiritual practice, which I won't go into, but I found so much strength and solace in just what I call looking within. So meditation, that can be in the form of stretching, of walking, of even what we were all doing for 10 minutes before we got on here, of just being quiet, just spending time not doing anything. And then also creativity and doing creative projects. Those for me count as spirituality and going within, because you really need to kind of take a break from what's on the outside in order to achieve those things, or to even engage with them. Going outside is a great example. There's just you and nature, if you're lucky. And there's just not that much input, and it kind of gives you space to be with your thoughts and be with, whatever kind of comes up. And I find a lot of creativity in that. I find a lot of inspiration and direction. And in those times when I'm like, I don't know what to do next, I have nothing like to look, like nothing in the future that I'm planning for. And I'm like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know where to turn. that's when I can also sit quietly and either have learned the patience to wait and be like, I know something will come, or get kind of allow myself to, I do these sort of like, they're kind of like meditations, but I just imagine what the future is going to be like. So I just sit and I'm like, you could do it for next week, next month, next year, whatever it is, when you're 80, like just imagining what it's going to be like. And it's amazing how, you can have no idea, and then you can be like, all right, it could be like that. And then I don't want it like that. Like literally imagining where I'm going to be next Wednesday or what I want to be doing. And it's amazing for me. When I first started doing this, I was like, I have no idea. And it was very difficult. I'm like, I don't care, or I just don't want to be doing this, or, the kind of stuff that come up. But then, it's a practice. I'd practice doing that and thinking about what I wanted to happen. And then it became much easier day to day to make decisions, because I was like, oh, I already know I don't want that to be what's happening in a year. So I'm going to start making choices that get me closer to what it is I do want. That makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'd love to open it up if people have questions for Tiffany about her slow lifestyle, or specific questions about how they can be slow.
I guess I have a question. I guess I'm just thinking about how your talk is reflecting also, or how significant it is to what we're going through now. There's so many similarities. Do you see any differences that you would also then expand upon your approach for what we're going through in the business world? Does that make sense?
It does. It's a great question. What comes to mind is, let's see if this comes to an answer. Let me just talk about something. A lot of what happened for why I kind of left the business world to work for myself, or whatever, however you want to put it, was I didn't like, I went to business school, and I didn't like how the business world worked. And a lot of my consulting is about how to kind of help companies separate themselves from, basically I consult companies to do the same thing I'm doing. And that's kind of how it all came about, is I was working with a lot of organizations who couldn't get funding, who had products or services that they didn't know how to market. Like they're like, we don't know how to survive because we're not the traditional model. And so there are always ways to figure out different ways to do things from a business perspective. And I have learned a lot of that through my own personal choices. But I've looked back and I've seen how the business world has been changing. Like I read last night that stocks that rank highly on social, environmental, and other, like, what do they call it? Like social responsibility measures, they on average, compared to the rest of the stock market, have only dropped 50% in the last few weeks. So put in a better way, they've dropped 50% less than the rest of the stock market, right? So we're seeing the business world shift as well. And it was happening before this all happened. But I think the way that we all survive, the way I've survived, is by living my values. The way organizations are going to survive is by living their values, which are inherently going to be more sustainable, because they are sort of, what do I put it, inherent to how they work. This is, I'm not sure being totally clear here, but I think a lot of the answers lie in cutting back any extra things, slowing down, just simplifying and finding alignment with core values and how those are articulated in our business or any other practice. I think, let me see if I can come up with a good example. I always thought it was really interesting when organizations would say, you know, I'm a car company and I sell cars, but every time you buy a car, we're going to donate money to plant a tree, right? And I was always like, what does planting a tree have to do with selling cars? It's, you know, they're trying to do something good, but they're actually creating a whole new problem for themselves in trying to figure out how to plant trees instead of focusing on selling cars. And maybe we're going to focus on selling cars that pollute less, and that's how we'll contribute, right? It's like this, it's a simplifying, and it's a being really focused on what the goal is and trying to kind of like keep it within those bounds. Yeah, that was a long kind of rambling answer. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it was a good example too.
Okay. I guess as I've seen the business world change in the last even year or so, to, you know, I don't know if anybody read about how the National Organization of CEOs or whatever decided to change their core values from being about shareholder value to stakeholder values. And I don't know if did anybody read about that? Yeah, you read about that. I mean, for me, that when that happened, I was just like, my mind is completely blown. Like, things are changing on a big level. And at that point, I was actually really sort of disappointed in myself that I'd given up and been like, I'm out of there. I'm tired of dealing with all this. You know, it's not aligned with my values. Instead of sticking with it and changing what's happening to match values, I was like, I'm going to wash my hands of it and get out of it. And so I guess what I'm saying is it might be a difficult time, but there's this effort that can be put in to align with values and to make things more sustainable and more focused and simpler and less excessive, or whatever we want to use to explain it. And that in itself is a huge contribution to our economy and our society, because if we can function and do the things we want to do with less and maybe slower, but still in a way that supports us, and it's going to build a much stronger world for us. Yeah.
That's a great example. I didn't read that, so thanks for sharing that. It's good. I mean, I wonder, and we've had these conversations at the fourth floor, like how the world is changing because of this. We have a question in chat. I'd just like to read it to you. Do you think you're going to continue this lifestyle your whole life? And how do you think of relationships with family and friends, and how frequently to engage with others?
Oh, great questions. I've actually, since I started doing this, I've gone back and forth a bunch of times. So, like, I met Sarah because I took a tech job and moved to Brooklyn from rural Northern California at the time, because I wanted to pay off all my debt. And I did that for 2 years before I came here. And even since I moved here, twice I've left to take full-time consulting contracts for 3 to 4 months at a time, where I went to wherever it was, like, and worked there. So I've financially had to go back and forth because there's not sufficient work here, and until now, nobody really wanted to hire remote strategy and marketing consultants in my network anyways. So maybe that will shift, which would be really great for me, because I would like to live like this. To me, it's like kind of inevitable. And I can't really imagine going back to, well, there are always parts of it that I just won't be able to go back to. But, you know, I would like to have a time in my life where I have more money and I don't have to necessarily have austerity months, but maybe I will, I don't know. Um, and then the engaging with people, and family and friends. So this was a huge part of my shifts, and I'm going to talk about, like, I was a little extreme with this. I found I had to do some pretty serious social distancing when I first started this, not because of physical health reasons, but because without changing the way I socialized, I couldn't properly function in this lifestyle. I partied a lot, first of all. Like, I went out drinking a lot, which is very expensive, very time consuming, and very hard on your health. And I had to change that. Like, I couldn't, it didn't work with this. So I had to, like, I moved to a rural place, and this was back in 2015, in a lot of ways to do that, because I just couldn't really manage my social life and this life. And I've been able to kind of walk that back a little bit or find more balance. But I've realized I'm just like really an introvert, so I spend a lot of time alone, and it's really important to me. But in getting that time by myself and kind of finding that balance, it has allowed me to want to spend time with people in a different way. I have completely changed. I'm glad you brought this up because it's a really important part. My social life is completely different. The people I spend time with are completely different. I mean, I still have the same best friend from when I was 5, and I still have a few different friends from all different times in my life. But the way we engage and how often we engage has changed. And I think it's going to be very different for everybody. But there's a few things I would say. Don't be afraid of both not reaching out and of reaching out. So whatever you tend towards and might be out of balance with, try doing the opposite, or try being comfortable. Like, for me, it was, I had to learn how not to reach out. I was social, like, all the time. I did things every single night. If I didn't have plans on a Friday, it was like deeply depressing for me. And now I literally haven't had a plan on a Friday in like 5 years. And it's so wonderful, which is a complete 180. And that took me time. And now when I do spend time with people, it is very intentional, and I can feel, again, this is just taking time with yourself and learning to listen to your own moods and needs, that I know when that time is like done. Like, I get really cranky, and I have to be like, oh yeah, this means I need time to myself, and I need to say no to whatever that activity is, and spend, and then I also had to reteach myself to reach out again, and because I went really far on the other side. And then I'm like, all right, but you do need to, make some phone calls, and you can't expect everybody to constantly reach out to you. So another long answer. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks. Does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up? Thank you so much, Tiffany. Thanks for joining us. I have a couple housekeeping things I just wanted to say. I have a piece of paper. I'm going to read it. Please follow us on LinkedIn, The Fourth Floor. And if you are a member, we also have a Google group and a directory so you can be in contact with each other. If you're not a member, I think we're going to send out an email so that you can apply. And Tiffany, my last question to you, and then I want you to give your Venmo account just in case anybody wants to compensate you. But my last question to you is just like, what do you think the upside is going to be with this whole coronavirus? Do you see anything?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. Self-sufficiency is a really wonderful feeling, and it's sort of the counterbalance to ability to make money. And it's like, I think everybody developing a little bit of self-sufficiency, it really gives you a confidence that you can kind of make it through stuff. And so I think that's going to help people. And just the overall, I think I've been really surprised at how much less I can live with, like spending less, but also less things, less clothes, less social time, you know, all of these things. It's just been really surprising that I'm actually happier with less of those things. And I hope that people will start to find that too, even if it wasn't by choice, that maybe it is okay to have a little bit less or spend a little less time working and a little more time with your family or outside by yourself or whatever it is. So I'd say those two things, and the focus that kind of comes with that.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Why don't you give your Venmo account?
Oh yeah, it's TJ-Hopkins-1.
-1.
I can put it in the chat too. I think.
And you're number one to me. Thank you so much for joining us, and everyone stay safe and healthy. And
Yes,
until the next time, you know, join us on the 4th floor if you want. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.